The
9,696 meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Israel, Lebanon, and the Syrian Arab Republic to participate in this meeting. I also want to invite the representative of Iraq. A question from this country was submitted at the last moment, and we suggest to make an exception, barring any objections from members of the Council. We intend to satisfy that request given the specificity of the situation and the growing escalation in the region. It is so decided. In accordance with the provisional rules of procedure and the previous practice in this regard, I propose the Council invite the representative of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations to participate in the meeting. There being no objections, it is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's provisional rules of procedure, I invite Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Madam Rosemary DiCarlo, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mrs. Rosemary DiCarlo.
Mr. President, members of the Security Council, once again, the Council is holding an emergency meeting to discuss alarming developments in the Middle East. This is just a little over a week after I briefed on the Houthi attack on Tel Aviv and Israel's strike in response that targeted Hodeidah. Earlier today, we all saw the news that Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas political bureau, was killed, together with the bodyguard in Tehran. Mr. Haniyeh had been in Tehran at the invitation of the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran to attend the inauguration of the new president, His Excellency Dr. Masoud Pezeshkian. In a letter to the Security Council President today, Iran accused Israel of carrying out an attack that killed Mr. Haniyeh and claimed it was a serious infringement of Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity and constituted a blatant violation of international law. Iran's supreme leader and other senior officials have vowed to avenge Mr. Haniyeh's death, warning Israel of, and I quote, harsh punishment intended to instill deep regret in the perpetrator, end quote. Various non-state armed groups aligned with Iran across the region have also threatened to retaliate against Israel. In a live broadcast a few hours ago, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel had launched strikes against three fronts, including against Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis in recent days. He emphasized that Israel was fighting an existential war with Iran. Mr. President, today's strike in Tehran follows in the wake of several recent escalatory events in the region. While violence continues unabated in Gaza after months of relentless diplomatic efforts, the situation across the Blue Line and inside Lebanon is on an increasingly worrying path. Since I last briefed you on 22 July, the negative trajectory has continued. In a tragic incident on 27 July, 12 children were killed and dozens injured in an apparent strike on a soccer field in the Druze village of Majd al-Shams in the Israeli-occupied Golan. According to Israel Defense Forces, an Iranian-made Falak-1 rocket was fired by Hezbollah from north of Sheba village in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah denied responsibility for the strike. The strike followed months of increasingly intense exchanges across the Blue Line with Lebanon and hundreds of aerial attacks toward Israel from various locations across the region that Israel has attributed to Iran-backed forces. On 30 July, the Israel Defense Forces issued a statement claiming a targeted strike in Beirut on a Hezbollah commander allegedly responsible for the deaths in Majd al-Shams. Hezbollah confirmed that a senior commander, Fuad Shukr, also known as Haj Mohsen, was killed. According to Lebanon's Ministry of Health, at least 5 people were killed, including 2 children, and many more injured. Mr. President, the various attacks over the past few days represent a serious and dangerous escalation. They take place amidst the ongoing war in Gaza, where Hamas continues to hold hostages abducted from Israel on 7 October, and amid continued hostilities and a catastrophic humanitarian situation for the Palestinian population in the Strip. Most recently, on 27 July, a devastating Israeli strike, killing dozens, including children, took place on a school in Deir el-Bala, where thousands of displaced Palestinians were sheltering. This was yet another reminder of the terrible toll of the war on civilians. Earlier today, an Al Jazeera journalist and his cameraman were killed, reportedly by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza while they were reporting from Haniyeh's home. Mr. President, allow me to reiterate the Secretary General's words from today. The Secretary General has consistently called for maximum restraint by all. It is increasingly clear, however, that restraint alone is insufficient at this extremely sensitive time. Diplomatic efforts to change the trajectory and seek a path toward regional peace and stability are urgently needed. Communication by means of missiles, armed drones, and other deadly attacks must end. I echo the Secretary General's call for all to vigorously work toward regional de-escalation in the interest of long-term peace and stability for all. The international community must work together to prevent any actions that could make the conflict much bigger and wider very quickly. We need swift and effective diplomatic efforts towards de-escalation. This Council plays a crucial role in this regard. The time is now. Thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю госпожу Ди Карло.
I thank Madame Di Carlo for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I will give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. President, I thank USG Di Carlo for her briefing. China firmly opposes and strongly condemns the assassination of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh that took place yesterday in Tehran, Iran's capital. This act was a blatant attempt to sabotage peace efforts and wantonly trampled on the fundamental UN Charter principle of respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states. China is deeply worried about an exacerbation of the upheaval in the region that this incident may trigger. The Gaza conflict has been going on for nearly 300 days, resulting in nearly 40,000 deaths and an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. Over 2 months ago, the Council adopted Resolution 2735. As of now, however, ceasefire negotiations have yet to yield any progress. While the spillover effects of this conflict are increasingly visible, with the tensions between Lebanon and Israel, between Syria and Israel, and in the Red Sea sounding the alarm frequently, the Middle East situation is hanging by a thread, much to the concern of the international community. Given the severity of the situation, the parties concerned must heed the international calls for a ceasefire and cessation of fighting. They must implement Council resolutions fully, actively coordinate with and support international good offices, and take tangible actions to push for de-escalation and the restoration of peace and tranquility in the region. they must not act single-mindedly and repeatedly take provocative and risky actions to stoke steady escalations. We strongly object to and condemn the recent irresponsible acts, including Israel's attack on southern Beirut. China reiterates that military means and abuse of force offer no solution and will only lead to a bigger crisis. The continued deterioration of the Middle East situation is directly attributable to the continuous failure to implement a ceasefire in Gaza. We urge all parties to comply with the overwhelming international consensus, work jointly for an immediate ceasefire to save lives, mitigate the impact of the havoc, and contain any spillovers. We urge Israel to implement Council resolutions in full, immediately halt all its military operations in Gaza, and immediately stop its collective punishment of the people in Gaza. Countries with major influence must put more pressure and work more vigorously on the parties concerned and make tangible, good faith efforts to put out the flames of war in Gaza. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I give the floor to Algeria.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the USG Di Carlo for her briefing. Today's meeting takes place at a moment of grave peril. We are on the precipice of a catastrophe. This morning, Israel committed an act of terror by assassinating Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, violating international law, violating the sovereignty of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Algeria extends its sincerest condolences and sympathy to the brotherly Palestinian people as they face this ordeal. Make no mistake, this is not merely an attack on one man. It is a vicious assault on the very foundations of diplomatic relation, the sanctity of state sovereignty, and the principles that underpin our global order. We vehemently condemn in the strongest possible term this cowardly and heinous terrorist act perpetrated by the Israeli occupying power. Yes, Israel has embraced a bloodshed, scorched earth policy, leaving destruction in its wake. A relentless tide of violence flooding Gaza, the West Bank, Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, and now the Islamic Republic of Iran. Where will this madness end? The savage bombardment of Gaza this morning, the deliberate targeting of civilians in Gaza, journalists in Gaza, targeting civilians in Beirut, the suffocating occupation of Palestinian, Syrian, and Lebanese Lebanese lands. These are not just illegal acts. They are a moral abomination that stains the conscience of humanity. Let us be clear. These are not acts of self-defense. They are a brutal aggression and a flagrant defiance of justice. These are acts of sabotage of the effort made by Egypt, Qatar, and United States to implement Resolution 2735 and get finally a ceasefire. The international community must not remain silent, defined by indifference as innocent bloodshed is spilled and international law is shredded into pieces. With utmost urgency, we call for an immediate and conditional ceasefire in Gaza and the lifting of the inhuman Gaza blockade. A ceasefire in Gaza remains the key of stability in the Middle East. We call for the complete and irrevocable end to Israeli occupation of Palestinian, Syrian, and Lebanese territories. We call for full accountability for the occupying powers' heinous war crimes and egregious human rights violation. We call for an unwavering compliance with the all UN Security Council resolution. Colleagues, we must act decisively to end this violence and build a lasting peace in the region. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя.
I thank the representative of Algeria for his statement, and I give the floor to Guyana.
Mr. President, I thank you for organizing this meeting so swiftly following recent concerning developments in the Middle East region. I also thank Under-Secretary General DiCarlo for the information provided. The situation in the Middle East is approaching boiling point. It appears that some actors in the region are intent on returning to the days where scores, real or imagined, were settled by the most brutal means. Civilization has taken us away from that era, with a rich body of international law now governing relations between and among international actors. We cannot afford to reverse those gains and resort to primitive approaches to settling disputes. Civilians are the ones suffering the most. Guyana, therefore, condemns in the strongest terms the constant disregard for and violation of international law in the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. We remind the parties involved that as member states of the United Nations, they have an obligation to abide by international law, including the provisions of the UN Charter. These obligations include respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, violations of which should be swiftly investigated and appropriate actions taken against those found to be in breach of their obligations. In this context, Guyana condemns in the strongest terms the recent violations of both Iran's and Lebanon's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Mr. President, We are witnessing the heightening of tensions in the region, underpinned by a constant stream of provocative rhetoric that does nothing but add fuel to a fire that is already burning. Guyana calls on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to refrain from further actions that perpetuate the downward spiral. In this context, Guyana recalls Resolution 2735 and the Council's call for Israel and Hamas to fully implement the terms of the ceasefire proposal announced on 31st May 2024. We are concerned that the latest attacks in the occupied Golan Heights, Beirut, and now Tehran, coupled with the continued bombardment of the Gaza Strip and violence in the West Bank, may cumulatively have negative outcomes for achieving agreement on this proposal. The central question for this Council, therefore, is whether we will continue to adopt a wait-and-see approach or whether we will use the appropriate tools at our disposal to temper the escalating violence. Mr. President, it will be a grave mistake to view the recent incidents in isolation to what is taking place in the Gaza Strip. All of the illegalities that have stemmed from various fronts in the Middle East since 7th October must be seen through the prism of the ongoing war in Gaza, a war that continues to mutilate and annihilate innocent civilians, the majority of whom are women and children. A war that also continues to kill journalists and aid workers at unprecedented levels and violates almost every rule of international humanitarian law. The death toll climbs every day, and anger is mounting on both the Israeli and Palestinian sides for the same reason. Both want security guarantees for themselves and their loved ones. In the near term, for the Israelis, this means the release of the hostages taken in the 7th October attack, while for the Palestinians, the plea is to end this war and create conditions for dignified existence. In the long term, however, security guarantees for both Israelis and Palestinians entail the exercise by the latter of their inalienable right to self-determination. The history of colonialism has shown us, Mr. President, that no people consent to subjugation, and certainly not of the kind that Israel has visited on the Palestinian people. The desire for freedom is innate, and this is the reason that Palestinians have continued their legitimate struggle for all these decades. The Council must therefore respond appropriately to bring this struggle to its just conclusion, where their aspiration for statehood is realized and they receive the redress for all the years of violent brutality experienced at the hands of their neighbor. Guyana is prepared to do its part in any Council action to this end, because this is the organ that has the responsibility to make this aspiration a reality. Allow me to conclude, Mr. President, by lamenting the ongoing loss of life in this senseless tragedy that has enveloped the Middle East, and to appeal to fellow Council members for us to work together to end the bloodshed and achieve sustainable peace for all. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I extend my gratitude to USGD Carlo for the briefing. Today we are gathered in this chamber again. No end appears to be in sight with regard to the ongoing Middle East crisis. Since the terrorist attack by Hamas on October 7th and ensuing Israeli responses in Gaza, my delegation has repeatedly expressed our grave concern over the escalation of conflict in the region, including across the Blue Line, as well as in Yemen. It is thus extremely worrisome that such anxieties now have become a reality. What we have witnessed is the further spread of conflict, while the ceasefire deal in Gaza, in accordance with the Security Council Resolution 2735, remains unrealized. In addition to attacks in the occupied Golan Heights last weekend, where 12 innocent children were killed, and subsequent airstrike on Beirut by Israel. A Hamas political leader was reportedly killed in Tehran following the new Iranian president's inauguration ceremony. We are deeply troubled that this series of recent escalatory incidents may result in an irreversible spiral of hostilities in the region. It is all the more regrettable that these escalations have negatively impacted the ongoing negotiations to secure a long overdue ceasefire in Gaza, release the hostages, and ensure aid scale to address the ever-growing humanitarian catastrophe in line with Council's resolutions. Mr. President, the recent worrying attacks in the region are undeniably related with the ongoing conflict in the Gaza Strip, and further exemplify the urgency of an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Now that the wider Middle East has reached a critical juncture, the choices made by major players in the coming days and weeks can fundamentally alter the political and security landscape in the Middle East. We again appeal for de-escalation. Against this backdrop, my delegation strongly opposes any actions that pour additional fuel on the fires of conflict in the region. We also urge all parties, including the relevant major players, both national and non-state actors, to exercise the utmost restraint from any measures that may aggravate the already volatile regional situation. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you, Undersecretary General DiCarlo, for your briefing. Colleagues, a few things are true and straightforward. First, and I want to be very clear about this, Israel has a right to defend itself against attacks from Hezbollah and other terrorists. That is precisely what it did on July 30, when it independently responded to Hezbollah's July 28 attack on Majd al-Shams, which killed 12 children. I also want to note that the United States was not involved with Israel's response on July 30 in Lebanon. That said, there is no doubt, absolutely none, that Hezbollah was responsible for this attack, which used an Iranian weapon and was launched from a portion of Lebanon controlled by Hezbollah. Indeed, Hezbollah has repeatedly fired rockets at Israel since October 8, with Iran's support and backing, flouting Security Council Resolution 1701. Hezbollah's attacks have displaced more than 100,000 civilians, and no member of this council should or would tolerate attacks such as these. Therefore, we call on the Security Council to send an unambiguous message to Hezbollah by standing with Israel as it defends itself against Hezbollah's repeated attacks. Second, Hezbollah is not the only Iranian-backed group in the region that has taken advantage of the situation in Gaza to undermine regional peace and security. The Houthis are brazenly violating international law with their attacks on commercial and merchant vessels in the Red Sea, attacks that have affected all of us. Iran's support for the Houthis clearly violates the arms embargo in Resolution 2216, and these attacks flagrantly disregard Resolution 2722. Iran's arming of terrorist groups in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq is similarly destabilizing and contrary to efforts by the Security Council to de-escalate regional tensions. Colleagues, Iran must abide by the Council's resolutions, and failing that, the Security Council must consider additional measures to enforce its resolutions to hold Iran accountable and address repeated actions by its terrorist proxies and partners that threaten regional peace and security. Third, the United States was not aware of or involved in the apparent death of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. Indeed, we have no independent confirmation as to Hamas's claims regarding his death. Fourth, and as Secretary Blinken noted earlier today, it is best not to speculate on the impact that recent events may have on peace and security in the Middle East. A broader war is neither imminent nor inevitable, although the opportunistic attacks by Iran and its network of terrorist proxies and partners across the region have repeatedly brought us closer to a regional conflict. For our part, the United States will continue to lead the way in diplomatic efforts to end the war in Gaza and reduce regional tensions. We will continue to work hard to prevent a broader regional war. That starts, as Secretary Blinken reaffirmed today, with finalizing an agreement for an immediate ceasefire with the release of hostages in Gaza, as called for in Resolution 2735. A ceasefire agreement is the surest way to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people and unlock the possibility of broader stability. And so, the United States will continue to work in partnership with Egypt, Qatar, and other regional partners to seek to deliver an agreement. We have also made clear to all the parties that we want to avoid an escalation of fighting along the blue line between Israel and Lebanon. We remain committed to a diplomatic outcome to restore calm along the blue line that would allow citizens on both sides to safely return to their homes. Again, we believe that there is still time and space for a diplomatic solution. We encourage members of this Council with direct influence over Iran to increase pressure on it to stop escalating its proxy conflict against Israel and other actors. Indeed, every member of this Council should call on Iran to stop arming, advising, and financing terrorist groups, and to rein in the actions of proxies and partners who threaten regional peace and security. In this dangerous moment, it is imperative that we work together to reduce tensions in the region. Rest assured, the United States will continue to do our part and appreciates the efforts of other nations who share our commitment to support lasting regional peace. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, we thank China and Algeria for calling for this urgent meeting, as well as the Russian presidency for expeditiously convening it on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. We are also grateful to Undersecretary General DiCarlo for her insights. Mr. President, we condemn today's airstrike in Iran, which resulted in the death of Mr. Ismail Haniyeh, leader of Hamas. Our concern is that this tragic event can potentially inflame the tensions between Israel and its neighbors and trigger conflicts with far-reaching negative impact on regional and international peace and security. We strongly call on both parties to exercise maximum restraint and approach the situation with a high degree of caution, prudence, and wisdom in order to prevent further escalation of the conflict, which could hinder ongoing efforts towards bringing to a halt the war in Gaza. Mr. President, we have repeatedly warned this Council about the risk of the Israel-Palestine conflict spreading across the region and about its consequences. Unfortunately, the current events can compromise diplomatic efforts aimed at reaching an agreement leading to a ceasefire in Gaza and to the release of Israel hostages still under Hamas captivity. Israel, on its part, must comply with international legal standards and agreements, including International Court of Justice rulings. We also demand urgent concrete actions to address the Israel-Palestinian conflict through negotiations. In this regard, we urge the parties to agree to an immediate ceasefire and effectively implement the relevant Security Council resolutions. It is imperative that the parties engage in constructive dialogue to resolve their differences peacefully. International efforts should focus on facilitating negotiations and finding a lasting resolution to the conflict. The Security Council must continue to closely monitor the situation and take all possible measures to prevent any further escalation which may result from this attack. Careful consideration of risks and extended consequences is therefore essential during this critical moment. We reiterate our call for the implementation of the two-state solution, a solution of two independent and sovereign states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security, both as members of the United Nations. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France.
I thank you, Mr. President. France is alarmed by the rise in tensions and the risk of a significant regional conflagration in the Near and Middle East. We call on the greatest possible responsibility and the greatest possible restraint to avoid a regional conflagration. Iran must stop supporting destabilizing actors and exercise and call for restraint throughout the region in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon. France is strongly attached to regional stability and the security of its partners in the region, and we call on everything to be done to avoid another military escalation. We are in contact with all parties and working for a de-escalation to avoid a war which would have devastating consequences for the region. President of France, Emmanuel Macron, conveyed this to the Israeli Prime Minister and the Iranian President. We have condemned in the strongest terms the attack that struck the Druze town Majd al-Shams in the occupied Syrian Golan with a very heavy death toll. France reiterates its condolences to the families of all the civilian victims. We will continue our efforts in favor of de-escalation in South Lebanon. France is attached to the security of Israel and Lebanon. The President of France has restated the commitment of France to stand with them in working towards a diplomatic solution in coordination with the United States on the basis of Resolution 1701. In this context, France supports and proposes the renewal of the mandate of UNIFIL, the action of which is essential for regional stability. Mr. President, civilian populations have paid a heavy price in the region. International humanitarian law enjoins all parties to ensure their protection. We call for the need to respect the principles of proportionality, necessity, and distinction in conformity with the Geneva Conventions. We also recall the need to not impede the delivery of humanitarian assistance. We reaffirm our demand and the demand of this Council to release unconditionally and immediately all hostages and our demand for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. France reaffirms how urgent it is to achieve a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and only a two-state solution is viable. It's time to assume our responsibilities and avoid escalation, which would be devastating for the region. Thank you. I thank the representative of France for your statement, and I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And I join others in thanking USG DiCarlo for her briefing. The UK is deeply concerned by the escalation of tensions in the Middle East and the impact this may have on regional security and stability. I'll make 3 points. First, escalation and a cycle of endless violence is in no one's interests. We do not want to see further bloodshed. We urge calm and call for immediate restraint. Our Foreign Secretary is in the region as we speak, reiterating this call and encouraging de-escalation. The path to peace must be through diplomatic negotiations. Long-term peace will not be secured by bombs and bullets. Second, in recent weeks, we've seen reckless attacks launched by the Houthis against Tel Aviv, killing 1 person, and Hezbollah rockets fired on innocent children in Majd al-Shams, resulting in at least 12 deaths and many more injured. We have repeatedly been clear in this Council of Iran's role in destabilizing the region through its use of proxies, including Lebanese Hezbollah and the Houthis. These attacks are enabled by the continued supply of advanced weaponry by Iran, especially missiles, to proxy groups. This must cease. The UK is resolute in our commitment to Israel's security. We support Israel's right to defend itself in the face of such aggression, in line with international humanitarian law. Third, since October 7 last year, we have seen the terrible toll on Israelis, Palestinians, and many others in the region. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is truly appalling, with nearly 40,000 Palestinians killed. The impact of this devastation is particularly acute for women and children. The attempts by Iran and their proxies to use the suffering of those in Gaza as justification for further violence is perverse, and we reject them entirely. We support all ongoing efforts to bring stability to the region and an end to the suffering. We reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, to protect civilians, get all the hostages out, get more aid in, and open a pathway towards long-term peace. This will require the parties to commit to a renewed peace process resulting in a two-state solution with a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable and sovereign Palestinian state. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement, and I now give the floor to Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG DiCarlo for her briefing. We meet here at a critical moment for the Middle East. We are extremely concerned and alarmed that the region is closer than ever to a large-scale conflict that would be difficult to contain. The events of the past few days, which have led to this meeting today, have shown how fragile the situation is. Japan strongly condemns the reported rocket attack on July 27th that killed 12 children and youth and wounded many others in the Golan Heights. The targeting of innocent civilians is absolutely unacceptable. We are aware of the announcement by the government of Israel about their airstrikes in Beirut yesterday, as well as the news of the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh last night. Japan is closely following the event with grave concern and strongly urges all parties to de-escalate the situation. We fear the region is at the brink of all-out war. The international community should make all diplomatic efforts to avert this, and Japan stands ready to do so in cooperation with the relevant stakeholders. Let us not forget that the conflict began with the heinous October 7th attack on Israel and the taking the hostages by Hamas and other groups. The ensuing hostilities in Gaza have caused unimaginable suffering for Palestinians, reportedly killing nearly 40,000, injuring tens of thousands more, displacing millions in multiple times, and destroying much of the Strip. The fighting has reverberated across the region, from the West Bank to Lebanon, to Yemen, to Syria, to Iran. Japan reiterates its strong support for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza that can allow for the delivery of humanitarian aid at scale and the release of hostages. This is also essential to prevent a wider conflict that would only inflict more bloodshed and devastation in the Middle East. The future of the entire region and beyond is at stake. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement, and then I'll give the floor to the representative of Switzerland. President, I would like to thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo for her statement. Switzerland is extremely concerned about the situation in the Middle East. The attacks of the last few days in the occupied Syrian Golan, in the southern suburbs of Beirut and in Tehran, represent an acceleration of the escalation that must be stopped as a matter of urgency. We reject this spiral of violence and urge a return to diplomacy. Switzerland urges all actors involved and those who have an influence over them to show the utmost restraint, to pursue diplomatic means in order to ease tensions, and to seek solutions in line with international law. All channels of communication must be used. President, there is no military solution to this conflict. Dialogue and de-escalation are the only ways to avoid falling into the abyss of a regional war and to get back on the road to peace. International law, including the United Nations Charter, and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries in the region must be respected. We call on all parties to respect and fully implement the resolutions of the Security Council, including all resolutions adopted since the 7th of October, as well as Resolution 1701. Furthermore, all parties to the conflict must respect international humanitarian law in all circumstances. Civilians are protected and must never be targeted. Too many have already been killed in the region since the 7th of October. The above-mentioned developments and the continued fighting in Gaza continue to claim new civilian victims. This is unacceptable and must stop. We reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the release of all hostages. A ceasefire in Gaza is urgently needed, in particular to reduce civilian suffering. It would also help to calm the situation in the region, including in Lebanon and on both sides of the Blue Line. Negotiations must urgently continue in good faith. The Council must assume its responsibilities and contribute, united, to a peaceful solution. All eyes are on us. Switzerland is ready to make its contribution. Thank you. I thank Representative Switzerland for their statement and I give the floor to Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I also want to thank Under-Secretary General Di Carlo for her briefing today. President, we meet today in what feels like the eye of the storm. Several traumatic days for the Middle East region have led us to this, a new unfolding spiral of attacks and retaliation. The UN Secretary General said on 21st of June, and I quote, "The risk for the conflict in the Middle East to widen is real and must be avoided. One rash move, one miscalculation could trigger a catastrophe that goes far beyond the border and, frankly, beyond imagination." End quote. We deeply regret that this warning has not been heeded. President, I will rewind to Saturday and the horrific attack on Majd al-Shams in the occupied Syrian Golan, which we fully condemn. This incident should be investigated and the circumstances brought to light. The killing of children is outrageous and inhumane wherever it occurs. On the same day, an attack on a school in Deir al-Balah also resulted in civilian casualties, including many children who are sheltering there. I should not have to say it, but the life of a Druze child is equal to that of a Gaza child, is equal to that of a Lebanese child, an Israeli child, or any other child across the world. President, subsequent attacks in Beirut and Tehran yesterday are deeply concerning and they represent a serious escalation. The world and our collective security, built in the aftermath of the World War II, relies on respect for the UN Charter and for the international law. As we have done so before, we've called for maximum restraint by all actors. We firmly believe that there is no military solution to the crisis that is unfolding before our eyes. The positions expressed by Israel, Lebanon, and Iran in letters to this Council share one common thread, a concern for regional stability. We read those letters as a call to the Council to help avoid a dangerous escalation of no return. We believe that the Security Council should pronounce itself on this situation, if only to call for de-escalation and the pursuit of diplomacy and dialogue. President, while the crisis in the Middle East has a long history and a variety of root causes, we cannot deny that this spiral is being exacerbated by what is happening in Gaza. The suffering of Palestinian civilians on one side and Israeli hostages on the other is fueling flames across the entire region. Hostages on the other is fueling flames across the entire region. I heard from everybody today, and we also repeat, that what we need now more than ever is a ceasefire in Gaza and the full implementation of Resolution 2735. This should be done within a strict timeline. The people who rely on this Council to protect them, to maintain international peace and security, simply cannot wait. We also need to start talking about a time beyond ceasefire and a sustainable peace for the region, however distant that might currently seem. President, as precarious as the current situation appears to be, a full-blown regional war with catastrophic consequences is not inevitable. The scenario that the Secretary General described as something beyond imagination can still and should still be avoided at all costs. We, the Security Council, should seize the opportunity, which may well prove to be one of our last, to lead and demonstrate a firm stand from the international community. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. I also thank USG De Carlo for her briefing. Malta remains deeply concerned with the escalations during the past 48 hours in the Middle East. The killing of 12 children in Majal Shams in the occupied Golan Heights is shocking and must be condemned. Developments in Iran and Lebanon have the potential to spark further conflict and plunge the region into even greater despair. We reiterate our call on all parties to exercise restraint, prioritize de-escalation, and to pursue peaceful solutions to all disputes. All remaining hostages must be unconditionally released, and all parties must understand that extrajudicial executions are illegal under international law. Following the horrific 7 October attacks by Hamas and other armed groups, the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza rages on. This has given rise to a dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. Civilians and individuals protected under international law, including UN personnel, humanitarian workers, and journalists, continue to risk their lives. The prospect of a full-blown regional conflict remains worryingly present. It would lead to a crisis of untold proportions in the region, hitting the most vulnerable, women and children in particular. This is simply unacceptable. Malta has consistently called on all parties to concentrate efforts towards preventing a regional spillover. The most effective way to achieve this is for all sides to accept the fact that widespread conflict and the death of civilians is not in anyone's interest. Efforts towards an immediate and permanent ceasefire to the Israel-Hamas conflict in Gaza must not cease. Towards this end, it is imperative that Hamas and Israel accept and implement the ceasefire proposal outlined in Security Council Resolution 2735. We deeply regret that the latest developments and the escalating violence only undermine this and move us further away from this common goal, and we call all parties to reduce tensions. President, all parties to the conflict must fully comply with their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law. This includes the paramount obligations to protect civilians in the course of hostilities, including in the use of explosive weapons in populated areas. We condemn the loss of any innocent civilian life and reiterate our call on all actors to pursue all possible actions to protect civilian lives. Accountability for any violation of these obligations must be equally prioritized. The implementation of all relevant Council resolutions, including Resolutions 2712, 2720, and 2728, and the full, immediate, and effective implementation of the orders of the ICJ remain essential. In conclusion, it is only through the prevention of regional conflict that we can restore a credible political horizon to address the situation in the Middle East. This political horizon must be centered towards the comprehensive realization of a two-state solution along the pre-1967 borders, addressing the legitimate aspirations of both sides, with Jerusalem and the future capital of two states living side by side in peace and security, in line with the relevant Security Council resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for your statement, and I give the floor to Ecuador. Thank you, Mr. President. I want to also thank Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing. And once again, I'd like to reiterate the support of Ecuador for the work of the United Nations and all its organs. Throughout its term as elected member of this council, Ecuador has repeatedly called on the actors in this conflict to show restraint and caution and avoid exacerbating tensions and prevent violence. At this time, following the events which we've been briefed, I must reiterate this appeal with special urgency. It's necessary that restraint is shown and to avoid any kind of action that could contribute to regional destabilization. It's essential to reduce tensions and follow with diplomatic efforts towards a ceasefire that allows for the release of hostages, the start of a political process towards lasting peace. This is why, once again, I urge the parties to demonstrate political will and flexibility to finalize this agreement. The immediate implementation of Resolution 2735 is the fastest way to put a stop to the violence and reduce tensions in the region. Lastly, Mr. President, I'd like to reiterate our conviction that a peaceful, negotiated, and definitive and just solution with the existence of two states, Palestine and Israel, based on the 1967 borders and the relevant solution, is the only way to put a definitive end to this conflict. Thank you. I thank the representative of Ecuador for your statement, and I give the floor to Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank you for convening this meeting at the request of Algeria, China, and the Russian Federation. I thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo for a briefing. Sierra Leone takes note of the identical letter dated 31st July 2024 from the permanent representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran, addressed to the Secretary General and the President of the Security Council, informing of an attack in the Iranian territory that led to the death of Mr. Ismail Haniyeh, political leader of Hamas. Sierra Leone remains deeply concerned about this recent development, bearing in mind the overall situation in the Middle East that already poses a serious threat to regional stability and international peace and security. We reaffirm the principles of the United Nations Charter, including the principle enshrined in Article 2, Paragraph 4, which provides that all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. We therefore condemn the action of the killing of Mr. Haniyeh on Iranian territory, which clearly violates the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Iran. As a state party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, we have followed with interest proceedings at pre-trial Chamber 1 of the court, following the announcement by the prosecutor Karim Khan Casey on 20th May 2024, the filing of applications for warrant of arrest in the situation in the state of Palestine against including Ismail Haniyeh, based on his findings that he bears criminal responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed on the territory of Israel and the state of Palestine from at least 7th October 2023. If there was ever a quest for justice, that is the justice and accountability process our multilateral system based on the rule of law allows for, and not by unlawful killings. To this end, we call for a comprehensive investigation into the attack as reported by Iran to determine the facts and circumstances surrounding the incident and to ensure those responsible will be held accountable for for any violation of international law. Mr. President, an assessment of the situation in the Middle East indicates that the Israel-Palestine conflict, which remains unresolved, continues to fuel tensions and violence that could not only be detrimental to the civilians already facing a dire humanitarian crisis, but could also lead to a wider regional conflagration. On this note, we condemn reported attacks by Hezbollah in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights and Israel's strike on Beirut, both of which claim the lives of innocent civilians. Such actions violate international law, including international human rights law and humanitarian law as applicable. In our tireless efforts to pursue peace in the Middle East, especially in relation to the Israel-Palestine conflict, Sierra Leone reiterates its call for the parties to the conflict in the region to exercise restraint and avoid all acts of retaliation that may cause further civilian harm and an expanded war in the entire region. We emphasize the need for parties to the conflict to honor their obligations as outlined in the UN Charter when they pledge to join the global community and abide by its tenets that requires its member states to settle disputes by peaceful means, refrain from the threat or use of force, and respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states. Sierra Leone reiterates the demand for an immediate permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and the entire Middle East in order to prevent further aggression, civilian casualties, and exacerbation of the conflict, particularly exacerbation of the dire humanitarian situation. A ceasefire at this stage is not only an imperative, but also a moral obligation and a practical necessity. States with influence on all sides must apply the necessary pressure to prevent a pending catastrophe. In closing, we demand that parties to the conflict respect all the resolutions passed by this Council, including but not limited to resolutions 2728 and 2735, as well as 1701, as they are a reflection of our collective call for a peaceful and lasting solution to this decades-long conflict. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I will now make a statement in my capacity as representative of the Russian Federation. In its national capacity, Russia supported the initiative of Algeria and China to convene today's meeting relating to the extremely dangerous escalation in the Middle East. We studied the position of Iran very closely, as set forth in the letter sent this morning. We're grateful to USG Rosemary DiCarlo for her comprehensive briefing and assessments of the situation in Iran and the region. Russia firmly condemns the assassination of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh following a missile strike on his residence in Tehran overnight. This provocational attack was carried out at a time when the Hamas leader was in Iran, officially invited to participate in the inauguration ceremony of the president-elect of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian. Those who are behind this political assassination must have known how dangerous the consequences could be for the entire region. This is a serious blow, primarily to mediation negotiations between Hamas and Israel focused on a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, and Ismail Haniyeh was a direct participant in this. We must all understand this. These attempts to drag Iran into a regional confrontation destabilize an atmosphere in the region that is already at boiling point. The heinous practice of targeted assassination of high-profile political and military figures is bringing the Middle East to the brink of a region-wide war. We all remember clearly the dangerous escalation in January 2020, when the region teetered on the edge of confrontation as a result of the U.S. assassination on Iraqi territory of Qasem Soleimani and other Iraqi officials. We note with regret that the necessary conclusions were not drawn from this. Washington, in acting irresponsibly, set a poor example to others, and actions that undermine the stability and security of the entire region continue. Restraint and refraining from taking steps that could lead to further escalation in the Middle East are more important today than ever. Unfortunately, we're seeing the opposite so far. Yesterday, an Israeli UAV carried out a missile strike on a residential building in a densely populated neighborhood of a southern suburb of Beirut near the Bachman hospital, one of the biggest in Lebanon. Women and 2 children were amongst the dead, and more than 80 were injured. In Tel Aviv, they announced that they had eradicated a senior commander of Hezbollah that Israeli blamed for the shelling of the Majdal Shams and the occupied Golan Heights. This logic of spiraling escalation is now being applied to the political assassination of Haniyeh. We firmly condemn any such steps and also acts of violence against civilians, leading to many casualties, civilian casualties, and the destruction of civilian infrastructure. It's important not to allow the situation to slide to a full-scale regional war. Regarding the confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah, we've consistently highlighted the need for a full and comprehensive implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701, which clearly sets out both the obligations of Israel to end all offensive military operations and to withdraw their armed forces from the south of Lebanon and to end the occupation of Lebanese lands, but also the provisions on moving Hezbollah groups to the north of the Litani River. Colleagues, it's clear to everyone that the key to a resolution of the current unprecedented escalation is an end to the bloodshed in Gaza, where the number of dead is approaching the 40,000 mark and over 90,000 people have been injured. There are also people who die. Journalists and humanitarian workers are also dying and being injured. The only way out is a ceasefire as soon as possible, the exchange of hostages and detainees, and the organization of unimpeded humanitarian access to Gaza. Only then will the process for a peaceful solution to the Palestinian question and on international recognized basis be able to restart. This will be based on the two-state principle, which is something we have unwaveringly supported. We're ready to cooperate with all of those who share these aims. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you. In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful, Mr. President, at the outset, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the Russian Federation for convening this emergency meeting. I also extend my gratitude to China and Algeria for requesting this meeting, as well as those members that supported convening of this meeting. We also thank Ms. DiCarlo for her briefing. Mr. President, distinguished member of the Council, we request this urgent meeting and attend the Council today to address a matter of the grave importance and urgency, one that threatens international peace and security and challenges the very principle upon which this esteemed body was founded. As we address in our letter today to your Mr. President, they covered the assassination of Mr. Ismail Haniyeh, the political chief of the Palestinian Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas, and a great leader of the Palestinian people, legitimate struggle for self-determination as the result of an aggressive act of terrorism by the Zionist occupying regime of Israel. Mr. Haniyeh, who was in Tehran upon an official invitation of the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran to attend the inauguration ceremony of the new president of the Islamic Republic of Iran with the presence of leaders of many foreign countries, was targeted alongside his companion in his residence in Tehran today at around 2 a.m. local time. This act of terror is just another manifestation of Israel's decading-long patterns of terrorism and sabotage targeting Palestinians and other supporters and sympathizers of the Palestinian cause across the region and beyond. In addition to its terrorist objective, Israel was also pursuing political goals with this act, aiming to disrupt the first day of the new government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has prioritized strengthening peace and stability in the region and enhancing cooperation and constructive engagement with the international community. The Islamic Republic of Iran condemns in the strongest possible terms this horrible terrorist act as a most serious violation of international law and the Charter of the United Nations, as well as a grave breach of Iran's sovereignty and national security. This aggressive act of terrorism, as provocative as it is, constitutes a serious breach of peace and security and requires immediate and effective action by the UN Security Council in the discharge of its responsibility under the Charter. This crime is not isolated, but part of a broader pattern of aggressive actions and policies by Israeli regime against other nations in the region. Just hours before this heinous crime, this regime carried out cowardly terrorist attack in the southern suburbs of Beirut, Lebanon, targeting civilians and civilian infrastructures. The warmongering leaders of this rough regime have shown complete disregard for the basic norms and principles of international law. Their crimes reveal a lack of commitment to peace and stability in the region and suggest an intention to escalate conflict and expand the war through the entire region. The responsibility of the United States as a strategic ally and main supporters of the Israeli regime in the region cannot be overlooked in this horrific crime. This act could not be occurred without the authorization and intelligence support of the US. The continuation of Israel's aggression threatens peace and stability in the region. The international community, particularly the United Nations Security Council, cannot remain indifferent to such heinous crimes and must take decisive action to address this violation and hold the perpetrators accountable. Mr. President, persistent and systematic attack on Palestinian civilians in Gaza, characterized by disappropriation, use of the force and discriminate targeting, have resulted in tragic loss of life, widespread destruction, and deepening humanitarian crisis. These actions, which frequently target civilian infrastructure, residential area, and medical facilities, not only violate international humanitarian law, but also constitute war crimes under the Geneva Conventions. Unfortunately, the inaction and inability of the Security Council have emboldened this occurrence regime, allowing it to continue committing war crimes against the oppressed people of Palestine and acts of aggression against other nations of the region. The Islamic Republic of Iran has repeatedly warned of the serious repercussions that the malicious activities of Israeli occupying regime pose to regional and international peace and security. Despite these provocations, Iran has consistently exercised maximum restraint. Following the Israeli regime cowardly terrorist and armed attack on our diplomatic premises on Damascus, Syria on 1st April, we promptly notified the UN Security Council and Secretary General of the Israeli international wrongful act and called on the Security Council to denounce this unjustified criminal and terrorist act decisively and to take appropriate measures to prevent the recurrence of such crimes and aggressions. Regrettably, the Security Council has failed in its duty to maintain international peace and security, and a draft press statement proposed by Russia in condemning the Israeli atrocious act was blocked by the United States, United Kingdom, and France. Yet, it is now imperative that the occupying regime be held fully accountable for its atrocities. This regime must not be allowed to evade responsibilities for its violation and consequences that follow. Mr. President, distinguished member of the Council, for nearly 10 months, certain countries, particularly the United States, have shielded Israel from any responsibilities for the massacre in Gaza and malicious activities in the region. These countries have not only denied the inherent right of Palestinian resistance group to self-defense against Israeli atrocities, but have also shamelessly justified the Israeli massacre and genocide against defenseless Palestinian people under the pretext of self-defense for Israel. The US and its allies have made cynical attempts to justify and cover up by the Israeli regime against the people of Palestine through arbitrary and misleading interpretation of the concept of self-defense. Regrettably, the United States has once again chosen to turn a blind eye to reality and overlook the root causes of the current situation. The Palestinian resistance group like Hamas and other resistance groups in the region are not terrorists. They are legitimate groups under international law and were established to fight against occupation and aggression. Mr. President, the Security Council must unequivocally condemn Israel for its horrible terrorist act as a most serious violation of international law and the Charter of the United Nations, as well as a grave breach of Iran's sovereignty and national security. This condemnation should be strong and clear and reflect the international community's rejection of such violation of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Furthermore, the Security Council should take immediate steps to hold Israel accountable for this act of aggression. This includes considering the imposition of sanctions and other measures that are necessary to prevent further violation and to signal that the Israeli malevolent activities will not be tolerated by the international community. The Council must also demand that the Israeli immediately cease all aggressive actions against the Palestinian territories and other nations in the region. This demand should be accompanied by the call for ending the occupation of the Palestine territories, the territory of Lebanon, and the Syrian-occupied Golan, in accordance with the international law and the principles of the United Nations. And finally, the Islamic Republic of Iran reserves its inherent right to self-defense in accordance with international law to respond decisively to these terrorist and criminal acts when it deems necessary and appropriate. The Islamic Republic of Iran reaffirms its commitment to upholding international law and the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter. We believe that peace and stability in the region can only be achieved through respect for these principles. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя.
I thank the Islamic Republic of Iran for your statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the State of Palestine, Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, I thank you for your swift response to Algeria and China's request to convene this emergency meeting to address the further grave developments regarding the Palestine question and the broader situation in the Middle East. We recognize that this meeting takes place on the last day of the presidency of the Russian Federation and renew appreciation for your skilled leadership of the Council in these critical times. We also thank Undersecretary General DiCarlo for her briefing. Mr. President, it has been nearly 300 days since Israel launched its genocidal war on the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, a war that has gravely breached all tenets of international humanitarian and human rights law, a war that has flagrantly violated the UN Charter, including the cardinal principle regarding the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, a war that threatens international peace and security. Yet Israel is being permitted to wage this war in broad daylight with no restraints and no consequences. It is doing so willfully and wantonly, in spite of this Security Council's resolutions, in spite of the ICJ provisional measures orders, in spite of the global demands for a ceasefire. And still, the Council is failing its duty to impose a ceasefire and bring a halt to this depravity. Every day brings more horror, loss, and suffering for our people as Israeli occupying forces massacre Palestinian civilians, assassinate officials, kill humanitarian workers, medical personnel, and journalists, abduct civilians, and torture and rape them in Israeli jails, bomb and destroy Palestinian homes and infrastructure, and attack UN premises, including UNRWA schools, sheltering millions of forcibly displaced civilians who are being deliberately starved and denied access to medical care and the most basic needs for human subsistence and dignity by an occupier mercilessly chasing and hunting them down, repeatedly displacing them as they desperately search for safety in a place where no one and nowhere is safe. It is not only a catastrophic humanitarian crisis, it is an existential crisis. And today, yet another Palestinian official has been assassinated by Israel. As pronounced by Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian leadership condemns in the strongest terms the assassination of former Palestinian Prime Minister and head of the political bureau of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, in Tehran today. A national day of mourning has been declared in Palestine, and we solemnly acknowledge the expressions of condolence and the global condemnations of this act of terror. Moreover, we unequivocally condemn the criminal breach of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Islamic Republic of Iran, as we condemn the repeated breaches by Israel of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon, the Syrian Arab Republic, and Yemen. And this includes yesterday's brazen attack on Beirut. We call again with utmost urgency on the Security Council, the General Assembly, and all law-abiding, peace-loving nations to act forthwith to bring a halt to these horrific, criminal Israeli aggressions against the Palestinian people and on our region. We demand accountability for this assassination, as we have continually demanded accountability for the wanton murder and injury of over 130,000 Palestinian children, women, and men across these past 300 days of horror and hell in Gaza, and call for accountability for all of Israel's criminal policies and practices in our territory across the decades. Likewise, we reiterate our calls for accountability for all of Israel's breaches of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of states in the region, including the State of Palestine. The UN Charter must be upheld not solely in words, but also in deeds. The failure to hold Israel accountable has permitted and enabled these crimes and further emboldened Israeli government officials, military commanders, and settler extremists to escalate their reign of terror against defenseless Palestinian civilians all across the territory of the State of Palestine, in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, as well as across the region. Mr. President, violence and terror are clearly Israel's main and only currency. Not international law, not diplomacy, not mediation, not respect for human life. There is no red line for Israel, no law it will not breach, no norm it will not trample, no act too depraved or barbaric for its occupying army and settler militias, and no child, woman, or man off limits, even babies considered legitimate targets. The Israeli Prime Minister and his coalition of government extremists and military commanders believe there will never be a cost for their crimes. They believe they can literally get away with murder, get away with genocide against the Palestinian people. They believe it because it has been possible until now. No resolution, no ICJ order, no ceasefire calls have been respected. No demand for protection of civilians and humanitarian access has been heeded, and still no consequences whatsoever for Israel. This has gone on even as the Palestinian people have tragically live-streamed the genocide for all the world to see, believing that somehow the world would act to save the over 2 million human lives endangered in Gaza. Every plea for help, including in this council, has been made in the belief that the world would act in respect of the rule of law, our shared moral obligations, and our collective humanity. Yet this gruesome aggression continues, surpassing 40,000 Palestinians killed, the majority women and children, over 91,000 injured in attacks by Israeli occupying forces, nearly the entirety of Gaza's population uprooted, and the decimation of the Gaza Strip and trauma of the entire population. At the same time, in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, Israeli occupying forces and settler terrorists continue their violent raids, killing at least 569 Palestinians, including children. And Israel's illegal colonial settlement campaign not only continues as we speak, but is intensifying as it feverishly pursues its vowed annexationist aims, seeking to forever obstruct the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and independence and to destroy the two-state solution. Mr. President, members of the Council, until when? Absent any form of accountability, any serious mobilization and sanctions, including a halt to arms transfers, to pressure an end to these crimes, Israel is proving every single day that it will continue to act as a rogue state. The assassination today and all the crimes preceding it and that have followed it in the ensuing hours prove this beyond the shadow of a doubt. Israel openly declares its intentions to carry on, defying the Council and the international community as a whole, brazenly carrying on with its scorched earth killing and destruction spree in Gaza, vowing to further entrench its colonial annexationist occupation and its racist, discriminatory, hateful policies against the Palestinian people and recklessly escalating tensions. It is blatantly attempting to destabilize the entire region and provoke an all-out war in the Middle East with dangerous repercussions not only for the region, but far beyond. The international community must confront this reality and act to stop these crimes and aggressions. There is no right that Israel can claim to justify these war crimes and crimes against humanity. The right to peace and security is the right of all states in the region and in every region of the world. It is not an exclusive right of Israel. Moreover, it is a fact that Israel is an illegal occupant in the state of Palestine and possesses no rights whatsoever in our territory and over our people. This was unequivocally determined by the ICJ in the seminal advisory opinion it rendered just days ago on the 19th of July. This ruling must be respected and enforced. Israel has no sovereignty rights and no right to self-defense in a territory in which it is illegally present in grave breach of every rule of international law. This illegal occupation in all of its manifestations must come to an end, and the Palestinian people must be free. Mr. President, Israel has been the oppressor, tormentor, and murderer of Palestinians for decades, and it is the long-standing destabilizer of our region. It must be stopped. The obligations of the Security Council and General Assembly, the obligations of all states, including the high contracting parties to the Fourth Geneva Convention, are to act forthwith to bring an end to this unlawful, abhorrent situation. The lives of millions of civilians are at stake in Gaza and the rest of occupied Palestine and throughout the region. We appeal to the international community to act immediately. First and foremost, this Security Council, as per its charter duty, to maintain international peace and security. It must act to protect the Palestinian people and to prevent a regional war against it at this moment of clear and present danger. The international community has a choice to make. Let it be for peace and security. Do not let Israel drag us all to the abyss. I thank you, Mr. President, and esteemed members of the Council for your attention, and on behalf of the State of Palestine and her people, implore you to act.
I thank the representative of the State of Palestine for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. We must first stress the rank hypocrisy on display here today. This meeting has been called for by the world's #1 sponsor of terrorism, responsible for the most horrifying barbarism across the region and the globe, the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran has used its proxies, Hamas, the Houthis, and Hezbollah, to target Israel and our citizens from every direction. Just last week, children were innocently playing a soccer game in the Druze village of Majd al-Shams. An Iranian-supplied Falak 1 Hezbollah rocket murdered 12 of these children and injured 30 others. Where were the condemnations of Hezbollah and their Iranian suppliers for the butchery of these 12 children? All that was heard were expressions of concern for escalation and calling for both sides, again equating a democratic member state of the United Nations with a vicious terrorist organization to show restraint. Those who really seek stability in the region should welcome the removal of arch-terrorists, not call on both sides to restrain themselves. Yesterday, Israel carried out a precise strike against Hezbollah commander Fuad Shukr, a senior terrorist with the blood of Israelis and many others on his hands. He was the commander responsible for the Majd al-Shams massacre, along with all of Hezbollah's incessant missile attacks against Israel for the past 9.5 months. These attacks involved more than 6,500 rockets, hundreds of UAVs, and over 1,000 anti-tank missiles, killing dozens of Israeli soldiers and civilians, and forcing over 80,000 Israelis to evacuate their homes from the north of Israel. In addition, we wish to remind this Council of Shukr's responsibility for the 1983 attack on US Marines and French forces in Beirut, murdering 241 US soldiers and 58 French soldiers. This operation sends a clear message. We will defend ourselves and respond with great force against those who harm us. The State of Israel will not stand idly by. We will continue to defend ourselves and our citizens. The world must support Israel at this time and demand Hezbollah's compliance with the Security Council resolutions 1701 by ceasing its attacks, withdrawing to the north of the Litani River, and disarming. We, on our side, have a duty to ensure the safe and secure return of Israelis to their homes in northern Israel, and we will continue to act to defend all the people of Israel. However, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis can only expel their venom thanks to the head of the snake. Since the horrific attack by Hamas on October 7th last year, Iran has provided some $800 million to Hezbollah, along with missile precision technology, anti-tank munitions, and explosive-laden UAVs. These are all used by Hezbollah against Israeli civilians. This is in addition to the more than $260 million annually provided by Iran to Hamas and Islamic Jihad, an amount which has increased over the past 9 months. This support is reflected by the fact that over 30% of the military arms and munitions captured by Israel in the Gaza Strip were Iranian-produced. The actions of Hamas, the Houthis, and Hezbollah are not just an Israeli or Jewish problem. The Islamic regime will target any who stand in its way to achieve global tyranny. Iran uses its proxies to the detriment of Israel right now, but their vision is far wider. Now imagine these aspirations if Iran achieves its goal of possessing nuclear weapons capabilities. While this Council perverts its mission prosecuting Israel as we defend our people,
the Ayatollahs in Iran are formulating strategies to wipe Israel and the Jewish people from the face of the earth. They continue to provide millions of dollars in weapons also to the Houthis, who have put them to murderous use against Israel while they strangle world shipping routes. The Houthis alone have launched over 200 attacks against Israel since the October 7th massacre. The truth is that Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis are the poisonous tip of Iran's spear, which is being held against the world's throat. Where is Iran's summons to this council for the grave violations of every relevant resolution, such as 2216 and 1701? Where are the condemnations of Hamas and their vile attack on October 7th? Where are the condemnations for Hezbollah and the Houthis and their puppet master, the Islamic regime? Members of the Council feign concern for a regional escalation, yet quake at the prospect of addressing the root of this escalation. I wish to cast your minds back for a moment to May 2nd, 2011. Then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon celebrated the termination of Osama bin Laden, describing it as a watershed moment in our common global fight against terrorism. He exclaimed his relief at the news that justice has been done to such a mastermind of international terrorism. Please, take a moment to reflect on this reaction just 13 years ago and contrast it with the UN's condemnations today. Ask yourselves what you believe is the reason for this drastic shift. The only conclusion we may reach is that because it is now Israel that is facing barbaric Iranian terror and taking necessary action to protect its citizens, that the UN takes issue. Iran is not merely a sponsor of terrorism, it is the very engine driving the machinery of death and destruction that threatens us all. The blood of innocent children in Majd al-Shams and of the victims of the October 7th massacre and all other victims since then, the ceaseless rocket fire on Israeli towns, the ongoing plight of the 115 hostages still being held by Hamas tomorrow for 300 days, all trace back to Tehran's ruthless ambitions. We urge the international community to hold the Islamic Republic accountable for its crimes. The world cannot afford to cower before the Ayatollah's tyranny. We therefore demand that this Council moves to condemn Iran for its continued support of regional terrorism and increase its sanctions on Tehran. It must also list the Iranian Revolutionary Guards as a terror organization as it continues to lead and coordinate attacks across the Middle East and the world. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Israel for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. Thank you, President. I would like to thank you and also the delegations of Algeria and China for holding this emergency meeting. President, the events over the last few days demonstrate that war criminals of the Israeli occupying identity have decided to move on with their bloody aggressions in the region and to drag into this inferno with unlimited American support to the detriment of international peace and security and lives and blood of innocents. The Israeli occupying entity has perpetrated a few days ago a horrific crime as part of the aggression against the city of Majd al-Shams, which is Syrian and not Israeli. This town is in the occupied Syrian Golan since 1967. This has led to the death of 12 Syrian children and injured many Syrian civilians. The occupying authorities tried to shirk responsibility for this aggression, as abject aggression, and ascribe it to the National Resistance of Lebanon, to trying to cover up this crime and find pretext to pursue their aggressions on countries in the region. Syria rejects all of these lies contained in the letter sent by what's called the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Israeli entity to the President of the General Assembly and the UN Secretary General on the 29th of July. Syria reiterates the fact that the occupied Syrian Arab Golan was and has always been Syrian territory. This has been affirmed by all relevant UN resolutions, including Resolution 497 from 1981. Syria would reiterate the fact that our fellow citizens in the occupied Syrian Golan are Arab Syrian citizens who have always been an integral part of the Syrian population. They are deeply attached to their belonging to their homeland of Syria, their national identity. They reject the Israeli occupation and call for an end to it and for the Israeli criminal practices against them to end. This has been proved by their rejection of Israeli war criminals who tried to trade children's blood following what happened in Majal Shams. Syria reiterates the responsibility of the Israeli occupier for this abject crime committed in Majal Shams, weaponized by Israel to continue their aggression against the states of the region. Syria reiterates that an occupying entity cannot claim that they are defending themselves under Article 51 of the UN Charter. This is what the International Court of Justice stated too. Moreover, we cannot even think to believe the allegations of the occupying authorities that they are defending the populations in the occupied Arab territories when they commit the worst violence against them. This is why Syria reiterates its rejection and condemnation of the American statements which are justifying the Israeli occupation of the Syrian Golan because of its apparent importance for Israeli security. We reaffirm that maintaining international peace and security necessitates for the American administrations to renounce their destructive policy and to cease to prevent the Security Council from shouldering its responsibilities and fulfilling its charter mandate. President, the Zionist entity has perpetrated this morning another crime, another terrorist aggression in Tehran, in Iran, which led to the martyr of the head of the political office of the Islamic resistance movement, Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh. This assassination demonstrates the mentality of the occupier and is the Israeli response to what is called the Biden Plan, which is contained in your resolution 2735, which was submitted by the American delegation. Before that, the Israeli occupying entity had committed another terrorist aggression targeting a residential building in the south suburb of Beirut. This led to the martyrdom of several citizens, including one woman, 2 children. Tens of people from this neighborhood, a densely populated neighborhood, were injured too. Syria unequivocally condemns Israeli aggression on its territory, on Iran's and Lebanon's sovereignty and other states in the region. Syria expresses its full solidarity with these brotherly states when faced with the Israeli aggression. Syria would caution that Israel's continuation of flouting international law, the fact that they don't apply Security Council and General Assembly resolution, that they don't respond to appeals from member states from our organizations to put an end to the massacre, could lead to a conflagration across the region and threaten international and regional peace and security. President, at a time when Israel is continuing its hysteric actions in the states in the region, the suffering of our brothers in the Gaza Strip continues too, because of Israel's commitment to commit a crime of genocide over the last 10 months. No house, hospital, school, no humanitarian worker, no woman, no child, no healthcare worker, no journalist has been able to avoid being targeted, including hundreds of UN workers and humanitarian agency workers, as well as I said, journalists who are sharing with the world Israeli crimes that are continuing unabated. These war criminals from Israel would not have been able to continue in these war crimes, these crimes against humanity, without American support. unlimited American support, without the hypocrisy, without double standards practiced by some Western states who engaged in the Israeli war against the Palestinian people, who've stayed silent and have not called for accountability for these war criminals from Israel for the crimes that they've committed. Even worse, they've even opened the doors to them and hosted them to cheers and applause. In conclusion, Syria calls on the Security Council to shoulder responsibility, condemning repeated Israeli aggressions, and they must act immediately to put an end to this aggression and to stop it happening again, and to hold accountable those who commit these crimes, and to guarantee that these crimes don't go unpunished. Syria reiterates the fact that these aggressions will not weaken the determination of the peoples of the region to remain committed to their national choices, to their struggle to liberate occupied territories under Security Council resolutions, particularly 242, 338 and 497. Thank you very much. I thank the Syrian Arab Republic for their statement.
And
now I give the floor to the representative of Lebanon.
Mr. President, we meet in the Security Council today after 10 months have passed since the Israeli aggression on Gaza and Lebanon started. And we see this aggression today reaching our capital, Beirut, in a message that is bloody and clear and explicit. The culprit is the government of Israel and its prime minister. The victim is your ceasefire resolution. The objective is to drag Israel's allies into a regional war with disastrous consequences on peoples and countries and on the future and the present, Mr. President. We have said so before, and we reiterate today. Lebanon and the people of Lebanon and the government of Lebanon do not want war. Lebanon is fully committed to Resolution 1701 in full. We have put forth a roadmap and a vision to arrive at a solution that would preserve Lebanon's rights and would maintain stability throughout Lebanon's southern borders. This was a courageous initiative that was launched by Lebanon to break the cycle of violence and to create an environment of dignified living for its people. However, Lebanon has not received any serious response to its proposal. While we fully appreciate the efforts of friendly countries that are working on arriving at a diplomatic solution that would spare the region from war, we have read the calls issued by Israeli officials to implement 1701. And the irony here is that implementing this resolution means that Israel must withdraw from lands that it continues to occupy, that Israel must stop its violations of Lebanese sovereignty by ground, sea, and air, that Israel must abide by the international borders delineated in 1923 and recognized internationally and confirmed in the 1949 Armistice Agreement. Mr. President, Lebanon condemns the aggression that targeted the southern suburb of the city of Beirut yesterday. This aggression has led to the martyrdom of 7 citizens, including 1 woman and 2 children, and has injured 78 persons. Lebanon believes that this aggression is the most dangerous chapter of the conflict so far. It is a dangerous escalation in that it targeted a densely populated residential area. This is a clear violation of international law, of international humanitarian law, and the Charter of the United Nations. We had warned repeatedly of Israel's intentions to escalate and to launch attacks on Lebanon that would drag the entire region to an all-out war with grave consequences. Lebanon condemns all the Israeli aggressions that targeted countries in the region, the most recent of which was the assassination operation that took place in the Iranian capital, Tehran, only hours after the attack on the Beirut suburb. This confirms Israel's hostile intentions and its desire to expand the scope of the conflict to cover the entire region. Moreover, we condemn the outrageous crime that was perpetrated today and which killed Al Jazeera correspondent Ismail Al-Ghul and cameraman Rami Arifi. This is a pattern that Israel has developed in continuing to target journalists and has not spared any Lebanese journalists either. 3 Lebanese journalists have been martyred by Israel since the 8th of October. Mr. President, for the past 10 months, we have been witnessing the most outrageous crimes against innocent civilians, be that on the land of Palestine or on the land of Lebanon. And the orders issued by the International Court of Justice provide further proof of the illegitimacy of the Israeli occupation and the need to end it. No one can believe that we can return to calm and stability without finding a serious solution that is based on Israel's withdrawal from all the Arab territories it occupies. And no one can believe that the confrontation will end as long as occupation exists. Therefore, the primary condition to any initiative or effort must be based on ending the occupation of the Shaba farms, of the Kafr Shoba hills, as well as the outskirts of the town of Al-Mari. Moreover, we must resolve all the issues that Lebanon expressed reservations on throughout the Blue Line, and violations of Lebanese sovereignty through land, air, and sea must stop. Mr. President, all efforts are welcome, and all attempts to reach a calm are appreciated, and all of these are valued. But establishing stability requires good faith, national will, and men and women of a state. And the pattern of behavior that we see from the Israeli government, which has torpedoed all attempts to reach a truce and all diplomatic mediation and international efforts, as a government that has implemented none of the resolutions issued by this esteemed council, the most recent of which was Resolution 2735. We see that this government only seeks to sustain and prolong Netanyahu's political career. As for the Majd al-Shams incident, this was condemned by the Lebanese government in a clear statement, and we condemned the killing of civilians. The exact circumstances of this incident have not come to light, but we do know that it took place on occupied Syrian territory and harmed Syrian brethren. The main reason for this attack is because this area is occupied by Israel and has been so since 1967. Israel has implemented none of the international resolutions that require it to withdraw from this area and to withdraw from all occupied Arab territory. Israel's claim that it seeks to protect the population that it occupies in the occupied Syrian Golan is an unfounded display of political hypocrisy, and its claims of self-defense have no basis in legal law, in international law, because it pertains to occupied territory. The true intentions of Israel is to prolong and escalate the hostilities. And it is truly ironic that the killer of tens of thousands of children in Gaza and the West Bank sheds tears for the children of the occupied Syrian Golan and takes advantage of an incident with unclear features to expand its aggression in a misadventure that will put the entire Middle East region on the crater volcano. I warn you of providing it with cover and support and justifying its massacres. History will spare no one. The present is bitter. The future is dark. And what starts in the Middle East will spread to the whole world. Mr. President, Lebanon believes in international legitimacy, and as all small states, the United Nations Charter is the legal and moral umbrella that it seeks and that it resorts to. However, in light of your esteemed Council's continued paralysis and inability to implement its resolutions on Israel, which Israel refuses to abide by, our faith has been shaken, and we are more convinced that international legitimacy is no longer enough to maintain international peace and security. Therefore, it is important for this Council to amend its approach and to take a firm stand before it is too late. I thank you, sir.
I thank the representative of Lebanon for his statement.
Сейчас я предоставляю.
And now I give the floor to the representative of Iraq.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Ms. DiCarlo, the USG, for her briefing. I would also like to thank you for holding this meeting to discuss the situation in the Middle East and the repercussions of the Israeli occupation and the violations by its forces. These are a result of an accumulation of occupation and aggressive policies for more than 75 years. What has happened since the 7th of October 2023 cannot be seen separately from the accumulation of occupation, denial of rights that the UN in all its membership and this council was not able to find a lasting and comprehensive end to it after years of conflict, bloodshed, violations, stealing land and building settlements. During these decades, the international community have used every diplomatic track, international initiative, General Assembly and Security Council resolution to end the Israeli occupation and to end its aggressive policies and violations against the Palestinian people. However, this usurping entity has ignored the Charter and the provisions of international humanitarian law without any accountability, and they are finding false pretexts to defend these crimes. Iraq has previously, like other countries of the world, warned of the escalation and expansion of the war and its repercussions on international peace and security and the regional peace and security, which would lead to more instability in the region and will perpetuate tensions. Israel's continued aggression and disregard for international resolutions through the crimes is escalating crises and expanding conflict. This would have serious repercussions in the region that cannot be controlled. Further, the aggressions by the Israeli occupation forces on Palestine, Lebanon, Syria is no longer a defense, a self-defense, as claimed by Israel as illegal. It is now steps down the path of reprisal, genocide. Today, we see the occupation forces launching aggressions on the territories and sovereignty of states under false pretexts in disregard of the purposes of the Charter and the UN and international legitimacy resolutions. I would like to take this opportunity to express our condemnation in the strongest terms of the continued aggressions against Lebanon, Syria, and Iran, and we condemn this criminal behavior of assassinations. Mr. President, we call upon the Council and the Member States to shoulder the responsibility of the Council towards the maintenance of international peace and security, to end the war in the Gaza Strip, and to save lives, and to open border crossings, deliver humanitarian aid, and protect the Palestinian people. The Security Council needs to be more decisive against Israeli violations that belittle the stability in the region and the security of the peoples of the region. We call for support to the Palestinian people towards self-determination and ending the occupation and establishing its independent state on the land of Palestine. I think.
Thank the representative of Iraq for your statement. We've come to the end of the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.